The bitterest part was the forgiveness that didn't heal. I forgave not because I trusted him, but because I was exhausted. Dear daughter, the night is cold, and the silence is so thick that even the creaking of the wood sounds like a scream. I write this for you to understand that some words are just tools for manipulation. Back then, I was a shadow of myself. Conversations became echoes of empty promises. The need for validation drained my energy, and when he said, "I'm sorry," I wanted to believe it was a step toward change, but I was so tired of fighting. We were in the living room. The lights dimmed, and he spoke in that melodic tone that seemed to caress my insecurities. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." And I remembered how much I longed for reconciliation. It was as if all the pain had pooled at the back of my throat, and his words were a temporary balm. But soon the disguised conditions crept in like shadows sneaking through the room. And then, I didn't realize that "I'm sorry" didn't mean I'm going to change. It meant, I'm ready to restart our cycle. The pattern repeated, and the guilt withered inside me, like a flower suffocated by lack of light. That's when I realized that while he was apologizing, he was shifting the responsibility. You know how difficult you can be sometimes? He turned my suffering into a burden I was expected to carry. I found myself paralyzed by silence, seeking answers that would never come. Here's the harsh truth. Apologies that don't come with real changes are traps. They seem like medicine, but in fact, they are poison in disguise. One must learn to differentiate authenticity from convenience. So if you hear an "I'm sorry" without actions backing those words, pause. If the conversation shifts to your mistakes, pause. And if you need a clear boundary, use this phrase: "I'm not going to be the only one responsible for fixing what's wrong between us." In the next entry, I'll talk about the subtle manipulation that hides behind a smile and how to recognize it before it's too late. I was so immersed in the need for affection that I envisioned forgiveness as a saving act. I didn't realize that, in reality, it was trapping me in his distorted version of love. And while I let myself be carried away by this illusion, something inside me began to scream. What I called a relationship was a dance of masks, and what seemed like care was actually disguised control. That night, when the lights were dim and everything seemed calm, the air was thick with unfulfilled promises. The walls felt like they were closing in around me. I wanted to feel hope, but the truth is that every time he apologized, something inside me broke a little more. It was like trying to use a Band-Aid on a deep wound, without ever truly treating the infection. The pain persisted, only changing shape, hiding beneath a false cloak of reconciliation. And I didn't realize his words were like poison seeping slowly into my veins. "You know I care about you," he would say, and those phrases felt like a warm embrace. But the truth was, that embrace turned into a chain, pulling me back into a space where my voice was silenced. His care was nothing more than a game, where I always lost. I looked into his eyes, searching for the sincerity in his words. But what I saw was a reflection of a self I didn't recognize, a self that had become invisible amid the fog of emotional confusion. He had become the center of my universe, while I faded into suffocating silences. My worth was tied to every gesture of his, and any time he showed affection, I felt compelled to believe that everything would be all right. And then, one night, after yet another conversation filled with excuses, I decided that it was enough. My body was already tired, my mind in turmoil, so I got up and went to the window. Looking out into the darkness, I realized there was a world beyond those 4 oppressive walls. Freedom felt so close, but the fear of losing what I knew still paralyzed me. The moonlight illuminated my face, and for the first time in a long while, there was a glimpse of clarity. I felt the cool breeze coming through the crack in the window, and understood that I needed to set myself free. I couldn't keep placing my hopes in empty words. That's when I decided I wouldn't be the only one carrying the weight of our relationship anymore. I needed to start valuing what I truly deserved. In that moment, I knew I had to protect myself. If your apologies were not accompanied by actions, then I should stop seeking redemption. An inner voice whispered that I had the power to define my own boundaries. So, I took a deep breath and told myself, I will no longer be a hostage to your "I'm sorry." That decision changed everything. In the days that followed, I began to observe our interactions more closely. Those moments that once felt sweet now revealed themselves to be bitter. Every smile he gave me carried a hidden expectation. "Look at you," he said on one occasion, as if it were a consolation, but in reality, it was a judgment. And I hadn't realized how much time I had spent trying to change who I was to please him. I started to see that my weaknesses were being used as weapons against me. Every flaw of mine was amplified and wielded as a justification for his own actions. The conversation started to turn into a battlefield, where I fought to maintain my dignity. And then, I realized that when you put yourself in the background, the relationship becomes a warped mirror reflecting your insecurities. And that's the harsh reality. It's easy to lose yourself when someone wraps you up in their lies, but you must be the guardian of your own heart. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where your feelings are belittled, where your emotions are treated like low-quality merchandise, remember that you deserve the best. You are more than the words spoken in moments of weakness. Asylum, freedom, and respect are not privileges. They are rights. So if you hear "I'm sorry" again without true commitments, take a pause. Evaluate whether that love is worth it. And if you need clarity, know that you can walk away without guilt. After all, the only thing that matters is your peace. In the next entry, I will talk about how to recognize the small manipulations that hide behind a smile, how to notice the signs before the game starts again. That night, while freedom hung on the tips of my fingers, I didn't know that the game was already beginning to change. What I thought was an act of rebellion against his manipulation started to unfold into a new type of struggle, one that didn't just involve him, but also myself. With each passing day, I felt further away from who I used to be, a vibrant, dream-filled version of myself, now shrouded in a fog of doubt. Then arose the need to rediscover my desire for authenticity. One day, during a solitary stroll through the city, I came across an art gallery. The colors on the canvases vibrated in ways I had never known. For many, they were just brushstrokes. But for me, they represented the freedom I had been searching for. It was as if each piece was shouting, "You're still here." I stepped in and began to walk among the artworks, absorbing every nuance. It reflected my own reality. I was overwhelmed by a wave of emotions. The pain I felt when looking at that painting was eased by a new understanding of what it meant to be trapped. Tears streamed down without warning, and there, among strangers, I realized that I needed to confront the feelings I had ignored for so long. And then, I didn't realize that this experience was not just about freedom, but also about responsibility. When I decided to walk away from him, I realized I couldn't simply sweep everything under the rug. I needed to look within and understand why I had allowed so much pain to settle in. The forgiveness I sought was not a bargaining chip, but rather a reflection of my vulnerability. As the weeks went by, the echoes of his apologies began to fade, but the doubt lingered. And when he tried to come back, attempting to make up for his absence with sweet words, I felt the temptation to succumb once again to the vicious cycle. On the other end of the line, his voice was like a siren's song, alluring and seductive, but I knew the tide he brought was dangerous. He would say, "I've changed. You need to believe me." But those words were no longer enough. It was on a rainy afternoon, as I watched the raindrops sliding down the window, that I finally found the courage to face the mirror once again. I looked into my own eyes and quietly asked, "What do you really want, besides an apology?" The answer, though whispered, echoed in my mind like a drum. "You deserve more." And with that, I began to rebuild my life. I redefined friendships, explored new hobbies, and discovered the joy of being just myself. I started writing in a journal, not as a way to vent, but as a way to rediscover my essence. Every word written was a step toward healing. One day, I read a passage about self-love that resonated deeply. Unknowingly, those words shaped my perception. Love is not about accepting crumbs. It's about creating a feast for yourself. And I no longer wanted to be the woman who accepted only what was left over. A close friend, noticing my transformation, said, "You're changing, not just on the outside but on the inside. People will feel that." So I began to realize that every small change created ripples. My renewed strength was not just a shield. It was the light that attracted new connections. People started to appear who reflected my worth, who didn't just see the surface but understood the deep ocean that resided within me. Still, the echoes of the past were present. He reached out to me once again. With a tone masked by concern, he said, "I miss you. Can we talk?" For a moment, the old need for connection resurfaced. But then, I remembered that woman trapped within the screen. I was no longer willing to live in a web of illusion. I took a deep breath. I responded firmly, "We can talk, but know that I'm not here to fix what you broke." The conversation unfolded like a familiar dance. He tried, as always, to flip the narrative, placing the blame on me. "If you would just try," his words were poisonous. But I no longer felt that weight. In the end, I made it clear that I wouldn't seek redemption in his empty excuses. The freedom I found was not just about escaping, but about asserting my presence. "I deserve more than you can offer," I declared, finally delivering the message I had carried in my heart. And so, as I put a final period on that story, I realized that true forgiveness begins with self-acceptance and ends with the decision to walk away from what no longer serves me. In my next entry, I will discuss the subtle signs of manipulation that hide behind smiles and how to recognize those patterns before they return. The truth is, even after freeing myself, the shadows of the past did not vanish. The internal struggle between the desire to move forward and the echoes of that familiar voice persisted. I wondered if I could really trust myself again. The path to freedom was fraught with emotional traps, and I had to be mindful of every step. One night, while reviewing some old pages from my journal, I realized how words could be both a foundation and a shadow. Those memories served as a reminder of who I had been, but also of what I was fighting to leave behind. The notes about insecurities, broken promises, and empty forgiveness were there, witnessing the cycle I didn't want to repeat. Then it occurred to me that throughout this process, I had forgotten to celebrate each small victory. Why not acknowledge my own achievements? One day, while having coffee alone in a place I had always wanted to visit, I noticed I was smiling, simply smiling, not for someone else or any expectations, but for the pure joy of being awake and present in that moment. And then, the memory of the last conversation with him echoed like a distant bell. How difficult it had been to get to that point. Each breath became lighter as I set aside the burdens he had imposed. The weight of despair gradually dissipated. I looked out the window and saw people passing by, joyful, unaware of my past, unaware of the chains that had once held me captive. The thought of allowing myself to love again, to trust and believe in the beauty of connections, made my heart beat stronger, but doubt still whispered in the corners of my mind. That's when I decided I needed to surround myself with people who reflected the new version of myself. I started seeking new environments, support groups, cascades of voices echoing experiences similar to mine. With each gathering, with each sincere smile, I felt a little more whole. My friends were beacons, and their lights illuminated parts of me that I thought had faded away. Among them, I met a woman who had gone through similar experiences. She had a spark in her eyes, as if she had found the exit from the maze. We found comfort in each other, sharing stories and laughing about the traps that had kept us stuck for so long. She said a phrase that deeply resonated with me. We are not obligated to carry the weight of our mistakes, but we have the responsibility to choose our battles. And so, throughout these gatherings, something began to awaken within me. I allowed myself to explore new emotions and experiences that had once seemed impossible. I signed up for dance classes, something I had always dreamed of, but never had the courage to pursue. Every step on the dance floor was an affirmation of freedom, a celebration of the body I had neglected for so long. It was on one of those nights that I found a new passion. Surrounded by strangers, under colorful lights, I realized that I was happy, truly happy. A lightness took over me as I danced, as if I were shedding all the ties that once held me down. The music pulsed in my veins, and I was free. But life is never linear, and an unexpected message arrived, shattering the peace I had built. It was him, trying to sneak back in, reminding me of the moments we thought were good. And I hesitated for a second, recalling the sadness his presence caused. However, I had now learned to listen to my own voice. I took a deep breath, thinking about the victories I had achieved. I didn't let nostalgia drag me back into the vicious cycle. That's when, with a new understanding, I replied to him, "I'm grateful for the lessons, but you are not part of my story now." And I closed that chapter definitively, knowing that this break was exactly what my heart truly needed. In the next entry, I will explore how true freedom is built in the midst of re-encounters with oneself, how to understand that each new choice is a reflection of growing self-love. After all, freedom is a state of mind that blossoms when we look within and find the courage to move forward.